kyo nam myoho renge kyo nam myoho renge kyo.
Hi, everyone. Let's continue with this very deep investigation into the scholarship history and the currents of Nichiren's lifetime, the opening of the eyes. So, as I continue to read this sutra, I want you to remain aware that a big part of Nichiren's writings are, of course, the scholarship, but he uses the scholarship not only to instruct his students of Buddhism and to, as Nichiren might say it today, set the record straight. He does a lot of correcting of little branches and sects that go off in their own merry way without respecting the entirety of Buddhism. Again, this is the way Buddhism has been taught from the start, from Shakyamuni Buddha on, the exhortation to study the entire breadth of Buddhism in order to allow for the incredible variety that we individuals present. Each of us understands through our own experience, our own filters of understanding, in order to get to a core truth. So, in that way, all of the various teachings of Buddhism, all of them, not just some of them, are explorations, expedient means, ways of opening understanding for the multitude of life experiences, us, to gain access to what is the core of our existence, my Buddha's enlightenment, your enlightenment. The enlightenment may be the same awakening, but our path toward stripping away our particular assemblage of attachments and understandings in order to get to that Buddha nature are very individual. So this is why expedient means are so important, and this is also why it is critical that we study all of Buddhism scholarship. So Nichiren really hammers this home, but he humbly actually allows for all of that scholarship to apply to himself, his own position in this scholarship. And so as I enter to this next portion of the opening of the eyes, I want you to be aware of the politic, I suppose, if you will, of not only the lay followers and the monks that are following Nichiren's teaching of the Dharma, but also the political reality that he's facing, the persecutions and the sufferings that he's going through, and whether or not that, in fact, justifies the logic he's using and the scholarship he's exploring, and does that put a burden of proof on him. Camera's a little sideways. I think that's better. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so here we go. He just got done reciting a famous poem. And so here we go. If the person told the ignorant natives of Izu that he himself had composed the poem, they would probably believe him. The Buddhist scholars of China and Japan are equally gullible. So, again, this is a reference to study. And he's saying, if you're not a studied, dedicated your life to the study of the entire breadth of Buddhism, if you just hear one person talking about one teaching of Buddhism, one commentary, one sutra, and they told you that's all you need to know, if you didn't know any different, you'd say, okay, I will take that as fact. And of course, this obviates the problem of not studying broadly, right? So the same with this poem. The Reverend Lang Xu states that the doctrines of the true word, Zen, flower garland, three treatises, and other schools, when compared with the Lotus Sutra, serve as none other than an introduction to the true teachings of the Lotus Sutra. We are told that the Tripitaka master, Shan Wu Wei, was subjected to torments by Yama because of his mistaken view that the Mahavajrayana Sutra is superior to the Lotus Sutra. Later, he had a change of heart and became a supporter of the Lotus Sutra, which is why he was spared further torments. As evidence, when he, Pu Kung, and the others devised the womb realm mandala, and the diamond realm mandala of the true word school, they placed the Lotus Sutra in the center of the two mandalas as the supreme ruler, with the Mahavajrayana Sutra depicting the womb realm and the Diamond Crown Sutra depicting the diamond realm to the left and right as ministers to the ruler. Again, a lot of the opening of the eyes has to do with the lifespan of the Tathagata chapter of the Lotus Sutra. So, again, within this teaching of the justification of the position of the teaching of the Lotus within the entire scholarship of Buddhism is always a part, or often a part, of Nichiren's discourse. But listen to where he goes now. When Kobo of Japan drew up a theoretical statement of the true word teachings, he was attracted by the Flower Garland school and assigned the Flower Garland Sutra to the 9th stage of advancement and the Lotus Sutra to the 8th stage. But when he taught the practices and ceremonies to his disciple Jitsue, and Shinga, Encho, and Kojo, and the others, he placed the Lotus Sutra in a central position between the two realms of the womb and the diamond, as Shan Wu Wei and Pu Kung had done. In a similar case, Chia Xiang of the Three Treatises school, in his 10-volume treatise of the profundity of the Lotus Sutra, assigned the Lotus Sutra to the 4th of the 5 periods of teachings, claiming that it repudiated the two vehicles to reveal the one vehicle of the Bodhisattva, and then incorporated the former as the means to attain the latter. Later, however, he became converted to the teachings of Tendai. He ceased giving lectures, dismissed his disciples, and instead served Tendai for a period of 7 years, personally carrying Tendai on his back when Tendai mounted an elevated seat for preaching. Again, Tsuen of the Dharma Characteristics School, in his 7-volume and 12-volume Forest of Meanings in the Garden of the Law, states that one vehicle doctrine set forth in the Lotus Sutra is an expedient means, and that the three vehicles doctrine represents the truth. He also makes many similar absurd pronouncements, but in the 4th volume of the Essential Meaning of Praising the Profundity of the Lotus Sutra, he is represented as saying that both doctrines are to be accepted, thus bringing flexible interpretation to the tenets of his own school. Although he said that both doctrines were acceptable, in his heart he supported the Tendai teachings of the Lotus Sutra. Cheng Kuang of the how can he make a statement like this? We see the same thing in many schools that establish their own diversion from the totality of Buddhist scholarship in order to inculcate or to accumulate their own memberships, financial reward, and identity amongst Buddhist teachers. This is a vain practice, and it always invariably takes away from the totality of the scholarship of Buddhism. So the vanity takes them into a course where they then have to retract and kind of rebuild toward the center, or I shouldn't say the center because that implies a separate division, when in fact it is the totality. Okay, So I'm sorry, I don't mean to mix you up on that. But what's happening here is these teachers, they bring along all of these people as followers, and then as they change path, there's a danger that they could lose all those followers. So now they have to sort of mediate a return to the full teachings, and instead of just simply repudiating the vain teachings that they created in order to amass these followers, they have to slowly shift them and allow for them to bring some of that stuff along in order to then move toward the larger truth. It's painful, and if they really had the courage to do the right thing, they would simply discard what they had taught before, and corrected the path, and understand that the truth would bring with it a change of heart in these others, or either immediately or over time. But the correction needs to be swift and immediate. But this is the way humans are, right? There's the vanity, the ego. It's very difficult to perish. We see that even today in the Dalai Lama, who was asked directly by, who's that orator, comedian who has his own show? Oh, what's his name? British guy. Used to be on Jon Stewart's show, the Daily Show. Can't remember his name. Anyway, he interviewed personally with the Dalai Lama, and he asked him the critical question, one of many, about reincarnation, which the Dalai Lama in this interview and in many other instances has demonstrated is folklore. It's not real. It's not even Buddhism. It's a vestige of folklore and Hindu gods and that kind of thing. It doesn't belong in Buddhism. But he said in that interview very clearly that he couldn't correct that teaching of the Himalayan version of Mahayana, even though he knew that it was wrong, because he claims empathy for the hundreds of families who've lost people, and in fact his own position as a reincarnation, and that he worried about destroying the unity of these families' practice. He didn't say it in those words. You could look at Scott. Can't remember his name, sorry. But at any rate, you can see the pain in his face when he has to lay that out plainly for this interviewer. He doesn't spend much time on it because, again, as he continues to practice in his life, and he's now in his 80s, he sees with clarity the truth of the Buddhist teachings, understanding also that what took him there, what brought him there, was a lot of misperceptions that he was taught from infancy, and that, there is some compassion in him, but his compassion should be great enough to correct that, so that, as he himself admits, is an influence to hundreds and thousands of people, right? But there it is. Okay. So I'm not singling him out. I'm just showing him as a contemporary example. So please don't misunderstand. So let's go on. Now I don't remember where I was. Again, 2N of the Dharma Characteristic Schools in his 7-volume and 12. I read that. Ching Quan of the Flower Garland School wrote a commentary on the Flower Garland Sutra in which he compared the Flower Garland and Lotus Sutras, and seems to have declared that the Lotus Sutra is an expedient means. But later he wrote, the Tendai School, quote, defines this teaching of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life as the truth. The doctrines of my own school on matters of principle do not disagree in any way with those of the Tendai School, end quote. Is this a shift? From this it would appear, would it not, that he regretted and reversed his earlier pronouncement. Kobo is a similar example. If one has no mirror, one cannot see one's own face. And if one has no opponents, one cannot learn of one's own errors. The scholars of the True Word and the other various schools were unaware of their errors, but after they were fortunate enough to encounter the great teacher Dengyo, they became conscious of the mistakes of their own particular schools, because Dengyo didn't shift, he just slammed down the truth, the entirety of the teachings, and demonstrated the errors in their ways, not to make them look bad, but to correct their path, right? So you can see over and over again, we're learning the scholarship of the history of Buddhism, but we're also seeing Nichiren build an argument for his own case. The various Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and heavenly and human beings described in the sutras that preceded the Lotus may seem to have gained enlightenment through the particular sutras in which they appear. But in fact, they attained enlightenment only through the Lotus Sutra, even though they didn't know of it. The general vow taken by Shakyamuni and the other Buddhas to save countless living beings finds fulfillment through the Lotus Sutra. That is the meaning of the passage of the sutra that states that the vow has now been fulfilled, quote unquote. So, in the view of these facts, I believe, Nichiren is saying, that the devotees and followers of the flower garland, meditation, Mahavarachana, and other sutras will undoubtedly be protected by the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and heavenly beings of the respective sutras that they uphold. But if the votaries of the Mahavarachana, meditation, and the other sutras should set themselves up as enemies of the votary of the Lotus Sutra, the votary being the one who promotes the Lotus Sutra, like Tendai, like others, like Nichiren, then the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and heavenly beings will abandon them and will protect the votary of the Lotus Sutra. It is like the case of the filial son, whose father opposes the ruler of the kingdom. The son will abandon his father and support the ruler, for to do so is the height of filial piety. What does that mean? That means that if the son, he didn't describe it well here, or the translation doesn't do a good job. What he's saying is if your father, you have a filial responsibility and love and respect for your father. But if your father teaches you your whole life growing up that the ruler is bad, the ruler is bad, the ruler is bad, and you come to discover that the ruler of the country is actually benevolent and right, and your father had errant views for whatever reason, then you must leave your father's opinion to the side and follow the truth and follow the ruler. This is not what Nichiren is pointing out, not a betrayal of your father. It's the height of filial responsibility to uphold the truth that your father thought he was reaching for, but was mistaken. So you don't expose him as being a wrong, bad guy. You just take it a step further because you carry with him you carry with you his spirit, his lineage, his karmic identity, right? So, moving on. The same thing applies to Buddhism. The Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and the 10 demon daughters described in the Lotus Sutra will not fail to lend their protection to Nichiren. And in addition, the Buddhas of the 6 directions and the 25 Bodhisattvas of the Pure Land school, the 1,200 honored ones of the True Word school, and the various honored ones and benevolent guardians, deities of the 7 schools are also certain to protect Nichiren. So even though these are derivations or deviations from the full path represented in the Lotus Sutra and before, all of the personages, the forces of nature, the truths, although they're given names and identities here, aren't actual things, all of those will come to support Nichiren, or by default, the Lotus Sutra. Everything, even though it's a deviation and derivation, actually, once you take them into the full scholarship of Buddhism, work to support it. The problem resides in staying in those tendrils, those branches, without respecting the entirety of Buddhist scholarship. Do you see? This theme replays constantly. And it starts with Shakyamuni. Study the entirety of Buddhist scholarship. You will get the core. But if you stay on some tendril, you're taking away from the core truth. This is true of almost everything we study. This is the human experience, right? It is like the case of the great teacher Dengyo, who was protected by the guardian deities of the seventh school. I, Nichiren, think as follows. The gods of the sun and moon and the other deities were present in the 2 places and 3 assemblies when the Lotus Sutra was preached. If a votary of the Lotus Sutra should appear, then, like iron drawn to magnets, or the reflection of the moon appearing in the water, they will instantly come forth to take on his sufferings for him, and thereby fulfill the vow that they made in the presence of the Buddha. So does this mean that angels come out of the sky and strip you of your suffering? No, what it means is that what, as a human, you feel as suffering will become the impetus for your enlightenment, right? Earthly desires are enlightenment, right? So we use our human foibles of fear and emotional distress and what have you. And what does Nichiren say to do? Take this to Gohonzon, chant. Chant, because you can use it as energy as a springboard to send you to your Buddha nature, your treasure tower, your Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, your ultimate truth. So everything feeds the center. I keep saying center, but I hope you know what I mean. But they have come, presence, but they have yet to come and inquire of my well-being. And this is the perception, is Nichiren is getting persecuted, exiled, they even tried to assassinate him at one point. Does this mean that I'm not the votary of the Lotus Sutra? Now he's addressing doubts in his followers. And he's going to take that on as a personal doubt. He's not going to blame anyone. He's going to say, it makes me wonder, right? If that is so, then I must examine the text of the sutra once more in light of my conduct and see where I am at fault. So this is a very self-effacing dimension of all teachers, really. But Nichiren is saying, if from actual experience I'm being persecuted and I'm not being quote-unquote protected by the gods of Buddhism, which are all personages and mental exercises, right? Then I must see if I'm at fault. Let's question me. Let's see if I'm doing something wrong, right? Because things don't look a bit askew right now. So that sets up this question and answer format that he uses very often in order to teach. So he takes on the questions, even though they may not be able to formulate them, that might circle around him throughout his followers and those who are curious. Question: what eye of wisdom allows you to perceive that the Nembutsu, the chanting of Amida, Zen, and other schools of our time are the enemies of the Lotus Sutra and evil companions who are ready to mislead all people? Answer: I do not state personal opinions, but merely hold up the mirror of the sutras and commentaries so that the slanderers of the law may see their ugly faces reflected there and perceive their errors. But if they are incurably blind, it is beyond my power. All right? All he can do is show where they're in error, and whether or not they see that error or they take it as a personal affront and go on their merry way, isn't the responsibility of you or me or Nichiren. His responsibility is to show in the light of the teachings what should be happening and what isn't happening, and then it's up to the other person to either correct their behavior or discard the new information, right? So that's what he's saying. In the Treasure Tower chapter, in the 4th volume of the Lotus Sutra, we read, quote, at that time, many treasures Buddha offered half of his seat in the treasure tower to Shakyamuni Buddha. At that time, the members of the Great Assembly saw the two thus come ones seated cross-legged on the lion's seat in the Tower of the Seven Treasures. And in a loud voice he, Shakyamuni Buddha, addressed all the four kinds of believers, saying, "Who is capable of broadly preaching the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law in this Saha world? Now is the time to do so, for before long the thus come one will enter nirvana. The Buddha wishes to entrust this Lotus Sutra to someone so that it may be preserved." This is the first pronouncement of the Buddha. And with that, I'm going to close today's lecture, and we'll continue in the next. Let me know in the comments if, I've spent the last year here trying to create under 30-minute videos so that they could be, there's a lot of information in these things, so I empathize with you in your study. That's my whole reason for doing this. And sometimes more than 30 minutes starts to just run on into too many concepts to really chew on and meditate on and get something out of. And I also wanted to be relatively easy for you to go back to these videos as reference and, bookmark them in any way you like so that it helps you in your study. But when I started this, I started doing these very long 1 hour and plus videos. I'm not saying 30 minutes isn't long because of the density of information, but if you would prefer maybe time to time for me to do a longer video, or maybe you'd like 15-minute videos, my goal is to go through all of Nichiren's writings, as well as everything else I've put on this channel. And my occasional short version, 15-minute versions, which I call walking meditations, that kind of intersperse through all of this. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'm doing this to help you study as well as to help myself. So please, by all means, let me know in the comments what you think of the format. And I will try to accommodate or at least appraise some kind of appraisal of what I'm doing here. So thank you again for participating. I deeply appreciate your support. If you can, go to Cocoscope or Patreon, and although the videos are free to download at Patreon, there is a mode there for secure financial support. Cocoscope, you have to subscribe, and you're always welcome to go to my website, threefoldlotus.com, and do a donation singularly through there, wherever you feel the most secure. And of course, you don't have to do this, but I deeply appreciate it. Anyway, thank you. Namum Myoho Renge Kyo. Be well. Love all of you.